Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I do not have to remind you why we are meeting here today, but simply we should resolve tonight our memorial to a young man who lost his life in such tragic circumstances.
So I said to John White, I said, what's happened? Has he had a crash? So John White said, it's worse than that. He said, he's been stabbed. I said, he's been stabbed? He said, yes. He said, he's been stabbed, David.
I'll tell you a tale of youth, of hope. I'll tell you a tale from life. A young man came to Manchester and died on a vagrant's knife.
And those are John's pictures up on the wall. He worshipped his mother, really thought a lot about his mother, because she really gave up a lot for John.
John Marley was a young concrete technician working on the Mancunian Way, a new flyover in Manchester. One afternoon, he went off to get some cigarettes. 10 minutes later, he was dead. He saw a thief robbing a tobacconist's shop. He chased him up a back alley, caught him, and was stabbed.
I've lived here for something like 8 years. The tobacconist where the chase began is only about 50 yards down the block, owned by the same landlord who owns this property, as a matter of fact. 8 years ago, it teemed with people and little back streets. Now there are crofts and open spaces everywhere. The Mancunian Way, it's a different world entirely to the world of these back streets. It's like something from another planet. This, in a way, is the contrast between the worlds of John Marley and Michael Grimes, who stabbed him.
Ah, well, this man, Michael Grimes, come in here very, very regular. He didn't play, and he just had an odd cup of tea, and he usually knocked about with the layabouts all the time, you know. He was a sturdy-built little man, but there was a funny expression of, a down expression of him, you know what I mean.
I kept running up to Kath and saying, oh, that man just looked worried to me. Isn't it a shame? I was saying, you know, I wonder what's upsetting him. And the next morning I came in, the police were in with a photograph. I wouldn't have recognised him.
Michael Grimes was caught in Liverpool a few days later. He said he felt terrible for getting arrested for a thing like that. I wouldn't have minded it had been something like robbery. Now, what happened that afternoon? Well, here we have Oxford Road. And on the corner of a small street here, a tobacconist's shop, staffed by a lady on her own. 100 yards away, we have All Saints Park. And it was here that Michael Grimes met a young chap, Lyons, and they decided to rob the shop. It was decided that Grimes would go into the shop and Lyons would act as the lookout man on this corner.
At about 4:30 would be, a man walked in this shop, asked me for a packet of cigarettes. I served him, gave him his change, and he immediately threw a bag of pepper in my face and closed the door.
It was about this time that John Marley and his friend Tom Stevens, who were travelling along Oxford Road in the works van from the direction of the site, intending to go for some cigarettes at the shop, pulled into the small side street and parked here. Lyons, who was a very frightened young chap, immediately ran off. Marley was driving the van. He got out and walked towards the shop, but his friend Stevens had some difficulty opening the door. Apparently the lock of the car was jammed or something, but he managed to do this, and eventually got out and followed his friend Marley across to the shop.
2 boys appeared in the doorway trying to get in, pushed it partly open. I saw 2 faces. So he turned, tried to get out. So I shouted to them, "Hold that man!"
There was a struggle as Marley tried to stop the man, but of course the man who we now know was the man Grimes burst away, and Marley started to chase Grimes, followed very closely by Stevens. They came in this direction over here, crossing Oxford Road and going over towards Rosamond Street East, which you can see is only a short distance away, about 80 yards away as a matter of fact. They crossed here, weaving their way through the traffic.
The alarm bell was going, but so often you hear these things going when people are going in the morning, this sort of thing. I didn't take any notice at first. And then looking across the road, I saw these 3 gentlemen standing in the doorway.
One man was trying to come out of force his way out of the shop, and these 2 lads trying to stop him, and he just let go with his fists, you know, and knocked him backwards. I just thought it was a genuine fight, you know.
One of them appeared to aim a blow at the other, then dashed across the road in front of the traffic, which pulled up sharply.
The second man shouted to the third, "Come on, John, come on, John." And the first man disappeared round the corner.
It was along the side street off Oxford Road that Marley's friend Stevens dropped out of the chase. He said, "I've had enough, I can't run any further." Alone, Marley continued to chase Grimes and followed him down an entry onto a rubbish-strewn plot of land, completely surrounded by derelict houses. These have since been demolished. In Grimes' own words, "When I got onto the croft, he caught me, and he said something about coming back with him. Well, we had a short struggle, so I remember that I had my knife in my pocket, and seeing that he was a lot younger and fitter than me, and I wanted to get away, I stuck it in him." Grimes then ran off and up another entry, which was just about here, leading onto the street.
I turned round and I saw these 2 men running out of this entry, and as I came out of the entry I saw a man push the other man on the floor. As it happened, there was cars parked to block my view of whether he got up off the floor or not. And I mean, I never thought anything about it being a stab, I just thought it was a push, you know. Well, my husband opened the door, and as the man ran down the side of the pub, I came in.
Thinking I might be able to help in some way, I came round the block to the corner of Jenkinson Street, where the younger of the 2 men chasing the robber appeared from the corner of the Art College with a large stain on his shirt, which looked as if it was blood.
Managed to get him round the corner. When I got him round the corner, he fell again, you know, on another car. So I shouted one of the blokes out there to give me a lift with him. Anyway, we got him to the door, and he fell inside the shop. So we picked him up, sat him on a chair, and all the blood was oozing out of him. Anyway, he lost that much blood. He was too weak, you know, to sit up. Anyway, stretched him out on the floor, and all the blood was all over the tables and floor. I lifted his shirt up. I said to him, "Have you been stabbed?"
The whole period, from the attempt robbery at the shop to him receiving the stab wound, was perhaps just less than 3 minutes.
When later in the day Lyons heard about the murder, he was absolutely horrified. His own words were that, "I thought to myself, the twat's gone and stabbed somebody." And Lyons went to the priest, who told him he must go to the police and confess, but he was eager to tell the police that he didn't really need to come. "I could have got absolution," he said.
I am writing in the hope that at some future time you may find some comfort in the letters of those who loved Johnny so well. I think Johnny was the best person I have ever known. It's hard to believe that any person, especially one so young, could show such love and consideration for others, and such a sense of real values as he did. These qualities and his qualities and such a sense of humour and gentleness made me and the whole family so proud that Ernie was as me.
Well, I knew Johnny very well at school, and we often talked about what he'd like to do as a career. But I remember at the time Johnny had a rather, what he considered to be a dull office job, and he certainly wasn't suited with it, and he felt that he was getting nowhere. He applied to a firm of concrete specialists, and he got a job, and he went away from home to work, and in the times that he came back, I noticed, and I'm sure everyone else noticed, a great change in his outlook on life, and he felt that he was getting somewhere.
He came to give tomorrow shape on the high Mancunian way, but his dreams of the future came to grief in the slums of yesterday. The area, when I first came into it, was full of people who belonged to it, people who lived there and had done in many cases for a lifetime. As the district becomes derelict, these drifters, these people with no settled address, tend to come in. 10 years ago, I doubt very much whether you'd have found many vagrants, for the simple reason that the area was occupied by the people who'd spent their lifetimes in it, people who had pride in it and whose whole life had been spent there.
I think we'll be all right today. Temperature's gone up to about 40, so we'll have no trouble there. Down here. I don't know. You've got to be careful on the deck because I've gone and slipped down.
What pours have you got on today then?
Oh, got a number of pours. I've got...
When you work with a lot of people on a job, you don't know them all in the same way. And I got this impression from the people who work with Marley on the Mancunian Way. John White, for instance, the engineer in charge of laboratories, was never very close to Marley, but he was the ideal, Marley's image of what he would like to have been a few years hence.
Well, from my recollection, last time I saw John, it was about 4:45 in the afternoon, and the police were ringing me at 5:05 to tell me of the accident.
Was he one of many men working up here?
The labour force here is between 100 and 150, although John is not regarded as one of the labour force.
How much longer will the job take now?
Well, we think within 2 months the traffic will be running over the bridge.
And then everyone goes?
Then we go to other jobs from this.
And the whole lot just disappears, the workmen, the labour force, the machines?
Oh yes,
everything.
the contractor has other work to go to from here.
Now, Ken Ash seems to have been much closer to John Marley.
He arrived about 2:30 that afternoon, and he said, "Do you mind if I sit down in the office?" So, by all means. This is a thing he'd never done before. And then he started to tell me, he says, "You know, Ken," he said, "I've got something I'd like to tell you." I said, "What's that, John?" He says, "Did you know," he says, "that I've got no father?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," he says, "I'm adopted." I said, "You're not ashamed of it, are you, John?" He says, "No," he said, "but I was a bit worried about what other people think about it, being adopted." And he started to tell me all about his life and about his foster mother and what he thought of her. And I should say he absolutely adored her by what he was telling me.
Stevens, although he was a chap who didn't have very much in common with Marley, was thrown into constant contact with him because they worked in the same hut together, testing concrete. And he was the man who might have been killed. He was the chap who gave chase with Marley, and he has to live with the murder more closely, perhaps, than anybody else concerned.
It's just so shocked you don't believe it. You know, it could happen to you. You know, or it happened to somebody you know. the few seconds it happens in, it goes round in your mind for weeks afterwards, and you can't block it off or stop it. It's just those few seconds that go around and see what way could you got out of it. Could you do anything to have stopped it?
Grimes, in his account of the stabbing, said, "As it went in, I heard him shout, but all I wanted to do was get away." Grimes then ran off in the direction of Cambridge Street and went to an empty house in Carter Street. He said, "When I got there, I remember seeing the blood on the knife, and I was a bit worried then, but I got away, and that was the main thing as far as I was concerned. Anyway, I put the knife back in my pocket and had a sleep for a couple of hours."
We don't know very much about Grimes, apart from the fact that he was illegitimate by birth and that he had a rough, tough upbringing in an Irish slum. He'd been in trouble with the police since the age of 16, larceny, housebreaking, robbery with violence. The list of his crimes is as long as your arm. He appears to have been a lonely man. He was a sullen, resentful man who seemed to have a grudge against everybody, even his fellow vagrants. Seems to have been driven into these derelict areas of the city. He had an empty house that he was in the habit of sleeping in.
We have a few in the same type that come here. They're not the best of people, and there are a few of the people that we try to discourage from coming in here. This is the only place in the centre of the town where people can congregate without any charge for admission. They walk in and they're looking all around all the time, as if they are being watched. They seem to be on the alert all the time in case something's going to happen to them or something's going to collar them.
We've made many inquiries into the antecedents of Grimes. He has had a number of different employments, but all for a short period. During a period of imprisonment in February 1962, he received treatment at the Central Mental Hospital at Dundrum. Examination revealed that he was apathetic and depressed. He showed signs of emotional instability. He was solitary in his habits and complained of insomnia, but the medical authorities were of the opinion that he was malingering in hospital and was not insane. The day before the murder, a police officer had spoken to him about loitering near the very croft on which he'd killed Marley.
The little park in which he met Lyons, the man who he chose to act as his accomplice, used to be a bombed church. And it's typical of Grimes that it wasn't a friend who he got to help him, it was just a fellow he picked up from a park bench. Started talking to him about Dublin, where they both grew up, telling him what a rough area Inchicore was, where he spent his childhood. Then invited him across the road to a meal in a cafe. Lyons was horrified when Grimes pulled out a knife. He said, "Oh, you don't use knives nowadays, use a pepper pot." So Grimes picked one up off the table, put it in his pocket, and out they went to do the job.
When you look around here, this particular place, and you think about John being dead, there's some people around here, I think that they'd be only too pleased that they got this place. Because some of the living conditions, some of the carryings on here, the tramps that I've seen hanging about and the conditions that they live in, I've seen them round my plant, opening up the bins, taking out mouldy bread, eating it. Surely that they'd be far better dead. I know it sounds a bit hard for me to say that, but what a life. And when you see a young man like John, who'd given his life, well, they could have swapped it round, surely, let one of these tramps have died and John carried on.
A young man dead, his murderer sleeping, a district built on ancient wrongs. Surely the tale was in safe keeping. The streets have ears and eyes and tongues.
I did sort of have a good look at him and remembered him quite well for a few days, but memories sort of fade off, you know, and...
If it had happened again, you know, and I knew that he was going to use a knife, you know, they'd done more, like, for his own sake as much as John Marley's.
When the lad fell in through the door, they all got up and cleared out in the street. But they was still there, never went away. Well, the next day, we had a very bad day the next day after it happened, like, you know. But on the Friday, I don't know where they come from, people came round to see the shop where it happened and all that, and we had a smashing day. Don't know where they come from. Done very well on the Friday.
Now, one, at this stage, cannot say just what governs the response to such tragic events as the decease of John Marley. However, we've got one or two ideas of a memorial. My fund stands at £1,630, roughly.
You have been a very brave woman in the past sorrows, and we have admired you for it. We believe you will be given strength and courage to come through this great sorrow in the same way. God be with you all and give you his peace. Yours very sincerely, M. Welsh.
And whether you die in a double bed or bleeding in the street, the city goes its busy way and doesn't mark the date. Who's going to look up at the Mancunian Way and think it any kind of memorial to this young man?
Anyway, sent one of the blokes out across the road for the ambulance. And as the ambulance come, they just conked out on the floor as they got the stretcher out. Well, that was it.
Grimes is serving life imprisonment. Lyons has gone to Borstal for an indefinite period. And Marley's dead.